Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Conducting Lawful Investigations. As many of you know, conducting an effective workplace investigation can be a daunting task. It's critical to maintain objectivity, uncover important facts, and follow compliance and confidentiality procedures. Before getting into today's topic, I would like to take a moment to introduce myself and the organization that I work for. My name is Stephanie Zielinski, and I'm the Marketing Director at ComplianceHR. You may recognize my name from the invitation emails you received for today's event, and some of you may have even emailed me with questions about today. To prevent any other questions trickling into the Q&A box, I would just like to let everyone know if you are registered for this presentation, you will receive a copy of the recording and the slide deck. So please keep an eye in your inbox for email from ComplianceHR webinars. Now, a bit more about ComplianceHR. ComplianceHR is a joint venture between two incredible and innovative organizations, the AI technology company Neota and the law firm Littler. ComplianceHR delivers expert employment law guidance in a fraction of the time. Our goal is to simplify the complexity of employment law, something we will learn a lot about during today's presentation. To achieve that goal, ComplianceHR offers a suite of technology solutions around critical HR compliance topics, like employee overtime, independent contractor classification, employee handbooks, onboarding, employee leave, and so many others. However, today, I would like to introduce you to what we call our compliance essentials, PolicySmart and the Reference Center. PolicySmart is a comprehensive handbook solution that provides you with federal and state compliant templates, a compliance policy timeline, handbook checklists, and even automated emails to alert you on new legal changes that are going into effect. The Reference Center is a newer solution that combines many of our other rapid reference tools. This solution quickly provides you with information on a wide range of compliance topics at a glance. So why do we call these essentials? Because having easy access to reliable employment law information and an updated and compliant employee handbook is essential. The handbook communicates company culture, standards of conduct, compliance policies, and so much more. The Rapid Reference tool ensures that your team is equipped to answer HR compliance questions easily and, most importantly, accurately. So if you're interested in learning more about either of these solutions or the rest of the Navigator suite, I invite you to go ahead and click yes on the poll that should be showing up on your screen. If you're in full screen mode, you may have to exit to see the poll, but we are happy to offer you a complimentary demo of the Navigator suite. I will send your contact information to our team of experts to have a deeper conversation with you about your compliance strategy and how we may be able to support it. In addition to a demo of our solutions, you may be eligible to receive a free trial of our products, so you can see precisely how much time and money they can save you. If you're not sure at this time, I'll ask once more before we conclude the presentation, or you can request more information via the link in the links panel or in the Q&A box. All right, now I have the pleasure of introducing today's presenter, Rocio Blanco Garcia. Rocio is a shareholder at Littler in the Miami office. She counsels and represents clients in a broad range of labor and employment law matters, including employee handbooks, the employee life cycle, and much more. So Rocio, I will pass it over to you for today's presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. And before we start, I'm going to apologize because a byproduct of having a 5-year-old is that I woke up with a cold. So if I sound a little bit stuffy or I sneeze at any point, I really apologize. Anyway, I know talking about employment investigations, workplace investigations is probably not the sexiest topic out there, but it is an incredibly important one. And I will do my best today to maintain an engaging and lively conversation. And please note that I'm using the term conversation on purpose because you have a chat function through which you can submit questions. And my goal is that you submit as many questions as you have, and I will try to incorporate as many of them into our discussion here today. But what exactly are we going to be talking about today? Well, in today's agenda, we have to first start by understanding what is the role of the investigator, what is the expectation that we have of the person who's conducting this lawful investigation. We're also going to be talking about what are triggers that initiate this process in the first place, how do we plan for the investigation, how do we go about interviewing witnesses, and finally, how do we document the factual findings and conclusions. Now, but why are we even talking about this? What is the big deal with an investigation? Well, an investigation is important not only from a legal compliance standpoint and because it helps you mitigate risk and reduce civil litigation and damages, but it also has a return on investment that is incredible. It pays dividends. When you conduct an investigation, an effective lawful investigation, you increase employee morale. Think about it. Picture yourself sitting at the computer, frustrated with something that has happened in the workplace. Perhaps people have been making ageist comments about you or making other discriminatory statements towards you. And you have been bottling it all up and you're frustrated. And finally, you take the courage to put pen to paper and write a complaint to HR. The complaint gets sent, and then you never hear anything. What does that do to your morale? How would you feel if you finally built up the courage to say something and nobody did anything about it? So investigating and taking these complaints seriously is crucial to maintaining employee morale. It also keeps the complaints internal. Let's go back to the same example. Let's go back to that person that finally has sent a complaint and nothing has been done about it. Next time that person has a complaint, do we really think that the person is going to contact HR, or are they going to go to an external source such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to air their grievances? They already tried the internal complaint once and nothing happened. So they're now going to take it outside. And instead of being an internal problem, it now becomes an external one with third parties, with government entities involved. So we want to make sure that we are conducting effective investigations to preclude this from happening in the first place. And we also want to do this because it promotes a culture where employees feel comfortable bringing complaints forward. This in turn leads to better morale, as we've discussed, but also employee satisfaction and retention, which pays dividends for the company because you do not lose institutional knowledge and the wheels continue running smoothly and without so much interruption. But what is our expectation of the investigator? What do we think that the investigator needs to be doing? Well, the investigator, first and foremost, needs to be an impartial fact finder. We want to make sure that if somebody brings a complaint forward, that we do not put a person in charge of the investigation that has some ties to one of the parties or that may have a vested interest in the outcome of the investigation. Impartiality is going to be key to avoid biases. We need our investigator to be a good listener. And please know that there is a distinction between listening and hearing. Listening requires that we pause, pay close attention, and really listen for cues that may lead us to other issues that perhaps we also need to investigate. We want to make sure that the investigator delivers fairness, respect, and integrity to the process that protects the record. All the documents that are pertinent to the investigation need to be protected. We want to make sure that enough thought and thoroughness is put into the investigation so that it is appropriate and that there is an attention to detail. That the investigator is not just wearing an HR hat, but somebody who is actually being trained to conduct these types of investigations, that the person knows how to properly document the investigation, that does not have any emotion, which ties into that first bullet point that you see on the screen, the impartial fact finder. Because if you have emotion and you are reactive, you are less likely to be impartial in the investigation process. And we want to make sure that the investigator is ultimately able to reach factual findings, not conclusions. We want factual findings, things that are based on reality, on the perception of the events as told by the witnesses, not mere conclusions, not emotional statements. But before, we delve into the actual process of investigating, we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what does a good investigation even entail. Well, a good investigation is one that's going to be backed by policy, right? So you're going to want to identify what are the allegations and what is the relationship to the company policies or the law that exists, and how may we have a violation here. Again, as I said earlier, and I'm going to mention it again because it's worth emphasizing, you want to have somebody who is trained professional receiving a complaint. Not every HR professional has the training needed to be conducting these types of investigations. You also want to make sure that the investigation is done in a timely manner, and this is going to require balancing both the thoroughness of the investigation and the timeliness of it, right? Some investigations may be very convoluted and have a lot of issues, and therefore we might need to devote more time to them. And I'll mention this later, but really when you're having that initial discussion with the complainant, you want to set expectations as to time as well, so that the person is not frustrated with the process. You're going to be interviewing witnesses, and today we're going to be talking about what that should look like and what steps you need to be taking when you're interviewing witnesses. But a good investigation should be backed by witness statements. Sometimes we don't have those. Perhaps the particular allegations do not call for those, but if they do call for them, the expectation is that there will be witness interviews. And you want to speak with the accused. This is something that we miss so often. I do mostly advice and counsel, but I'm also a litigator. I litigated for many, many years before I transitioned to more of an advice and counsel practice. And because I've worn this litigation hat, I know what the court is looking to see. I know what a jury expects to see from us. And if we have never spoken with the accused, if we have not interviewed the person who's being accused of wrongdoing, the impression and the perception is that we kind of were reaching conclusions a little bit prematurely, and that we were not giving the accused a fair opportunity to respond. So not interviewing the accused should be the exception rather than the norm. And many times I find that in conducting an investigation, we interview the person accusing, the complainant, we interview the witnesses, but we do not interview the accused. That is a common misstep that we need to be avoiding. We want to make sure as well that we're documenting the interviews, not only our notes about the interviews, but also witness summaries. We want to make sure that we collect the documents. So many companies have an IT system that erases emails after 6 months or something like that, right? But if an allegation has been brought forward that's going to implicate potential emails or documents that may otherwise be erased as a matter of course pursuant to the schedule that we have internally for such things, we want to make sure that we contact our IT folks and that we put a hold on that so that those documents are not erased, so that they can properly be preserved in their original format. We're going to have a formal report. And we're also going to want to take remedial measures. If a good investigation, if something is substantiated, we're going to have to take some action to show that this was taken seriously. And that could be something as simple as additional training, or it could be actual disciplinary action up to and including termination. And then you're going to want to close out with the complainant. Let the complainant know what was the outcome. So if you are somebody on this webinar who does investigations or who advises on how to conduct these investigations, you may want to use this particular slide as a checkpoint of things that you should be going through in preparing and conducting and concluding that investigation. Now, how do we even know that we need to investigate? Well, the most important thing for you to know here is that no magic words are needed and that a formal complaint need not be filed. I always say that as HR professionals, our job is to keep our eyes peeled and our ears to the ground so that we are attuned with what's going on in the workplace and so that we have a good idea of what might be happening. So you might learn about the need to investigate in a multitude of ways. There might be an anonymous complaint that is made. It could be, in fact, right before I jumped on this call, I was dealing with a situation involving an anonymous employee who sent a letter expressing concerns about something that was going on in the workplace, right? And yes, the fact that it's an anonymous person, might preclude or diminish our ability to investigate to some degree, but that doesn't mean that we do not investigate. We take it seriously and we investigate to the maximum extent that we can, notwithstanding the anonymity of the complaint or of the complainant. We may have somebody come to us and say, I want to share something with you off the record, or it may come through a hotline. Most large companies these days have a hotline through which employees can submit complaints. And one thing that I will say with respect to hotlines is that it's important to have a centralized process. So if you have multiple ways in which an employee can report an issue, you want to make sure that the issue is not handled differently depending on which way the complaint came in. If the complaint came in through the HR office or through the hotline, you want to follow the same steps. You want to follow the same process and give it the same seriousness. And you want to make sure that the complaint that comes through the hotline is not going to, some database that we look every now and then, because then we're not acting in a timely manner as we're expected to. And then finally, nowadays, right, people have social media, people post things online all the time. And I'll give you another example. Just this week, I was also dealing with a situation where an employee had made certain threatening remarks on social media that raised concerns about the employee's ability to do his or her job and called for a fitness for duty, because we now had legitimate concerns that this employee was unwell to the point of posing a potential threat. That was just based on a Facebook post, right? So you might need to investigate those as well. Now, when you receive the complaint, you want to get as much detailed information as possible, because that's what's going to set the parameters of what we're even investigating. And we're going to talk about this in more detail in a few minutes, but you want to listen impartially to the person who's making the complaint. It is human nature sometimes to want to show empathy and to say things like, I'm sorry that happened. I can't believe this happened to you. And we're trying to, be good people and be empathetic, but the reality is that we do not know what happened. So we cannot say, I'm sorry that happened, because perhaps it didn't, right? So we don't want to commit ourselves or take a position prematurely. Instead, what we want to say is, thank you for sharing this information. We take these concerns very seriously. We will promptly investigate this matter, and I promise to keep you updated of any developments. Something like that. There's no magic language that you need to use, but you want to make sure that you're not committing yourself. We're going to talk in a few minutes about asking open-ended questions and then funneling those questions to get a more precise answer and make sure that we've covered everything. And you want to evaluate the complaint from the complainant's perspective, but then again, verify everything through a series of witness interviews. Now, before you get into witness interviews, you need to start by planning your investigation. You need to know what steps you're going to be taking, right, to investigate this matter. And how do we go about that? Well, we want to, as I mentioned earlier, identify the allegations, and that comes from having a discussion with the complainant, or if it was an anonymous complaint, from looking at whatever was stated in that complaint, to the extent that we're not able to now go back to that person and ask for more information. You want to narrow down what are the issues. Do we need to investigate whether there is sexual harassment going on in the workplace, whether there is something about workplace violence? And you also want to point out what are the laws and policies that may be implicated in this particular investigation. Then how are you going to go about getting to the bottom of those specific issues? You're going to need documents. You're going to need interviews, which I alluded to earlier. And then there may be other things that you need to do depending on the particular allegations. You want to set out a plan. The investigation plan should set forth the scope of what you're investigating. What are the parameters? You must be able to explain why you did what you did. Remember, you may be investigating today, And 3 years later, you may need to be explaining to a judge or a jury or in a deposition why you focus on those things in the investigation. And having a plan that you are able to refer back to will be crucial in you being able to explain why you did what you did. If you just decided in the moment that you were going to do it that way, but you did not reduce it to writing, the reality is that 3 years from now, you are likely not going to know exactly what your reasoning was in that moment. So you want to be prepared to explain why you did what you did. And the best way to do that is by having a written investigation plan. Excuse me. You're also going to want to gather documents. Now, what documents are going to be pertinent in your planning process is going to depend on the allegations, and it might change as the investigation progresses, right? But typically, we're going to be looking at things like personal files, time cards, if there's an allegation, for example, of wage theft. We're going to be looking at medical files if we think that there is a mishandling of a disability case, for example. Expense files if we think that there has been fraud or fraudulent reimbursements are being requested. You may want to look at meeting agendas, emails, voicemails. All of these documents may be relevant in one way or another depending on the particular allegations. And never forget about electronic data, right? We're not just looking for the paper document. We're also trying to look at the emails, any camera or camera footage that may exist, any voicemails. And again, because all those things may be erased per a set schedule every now and then, you want to make sure that early on in your investigation plan, you determine what you're going to need so that you can then preserve those documents appropriately. And that's why we put there, know your company's retention period. You do not want to find yourself in a position 3 years from now when you are in the middle of litigation of being told, oh, why didn't you preserve X email? And you will say, oh, I just thought that just IT does it. No, you want to be familiar with what the retention period is and take steps to make sure the document is preserved. Now, once we have a good understanding of what our role is as an investigator, we have received the adequate training, we have prepared our investigation plan, we have gathered our documents, now we're ready to start interviewing the parties and witnesses. All too often, people jump into the interview process prematurely without first having done their homework and gone through this step of preparing the plan. So I want to make sure that you follow a method before you get to interviewing the parties and witnesses, because otherwise you're not going to be an effective interviewer. Now, when you're interviewing, you need to be taking notes. Because why? What I just said. 3 years from now, you're not going to remember why a person said something or how it was said or exactly what was happening in that time. Again, I litigated for many years. I still litigate to some degree. And all the time, I have witnesses who tell me, oh, I don't remember, like too long has passed. So we want to have notes that we're able to refer back to in defending any particular company situation or issue that may arise later on. You want to have a written outline of questions. You don't want to be thinking off the cuff when you get there. I've been practicing for many years. I still find comfort in having an outline when I'm going to be conducting a fact witness interview, because even though I'm many times asking the same types of questions, having that outline to go back to provides a level of comfort and forces me to think about the issues at hand. Now, don't be wedded to your outline, because when we're having a conversation with somebody and when we are interviewing them, they may say things that require us to divert from the outline that we had prepared. So it is important to be flexible and to understand when we're doing the active listening that we need to be doing, that the person being interviewed may say something that requires us to go elsewhere and start thinking of different questions to ask in that moment. And that's what I call parking lot issues. Issues that may arise suddenly that we need to leave a space for so that we can properly investigate. Now, when you are going to start interviewing somebody, and by the way, I see a lot of questions coming in about the end of the investigation and what should be included in the report. I promise we will get through all of that later on towards the end of the presentation. So be patient. I will try not to disappoint and answer all those questions. So when you're going to start interviewing the witnesses, you're going to start by introducing yourself. You don't want to jump right into like asking the substantive questions. The person likely does not know why they're even there. So you want to tell them what your name is, what your role is with the company, and why you're even sitting here right now with them asking them questions. You want to start building a rapport so that the person feels comfortable with what's about to happen. You need to explain that this is a neutral review process, that we are engaged in fact finding, and that we are going to be conducting an investigation, that no action is being taken at the moment, and that all we're trying to do is have a candid discussion to get to the bottom of certain allegations that have been made. Important. You want to always remind the people that you're talking to about the company's non-retaliation policy. All of you on this call should have a handbook with a non-retaliation policy that you can refer back to when conducting these interviews. Because many times employees feel like, well, if I say something, they're going to take some action against me, or I don't want to be involved in this because what are going to be the repercussions? We want, in building rapport, create a comfort level that you are going to talk to me openly and nothing is going to happen to you. I'm just doing fact finding. I am just investigating. And we prohibit retaliation for your participation in this particular process. And you also want to talk about confidentiality. You cannot guarantee that whatever they tell you will not leave the room, because in the end, you are conducting an investigation, and some people will need to know beyond just the investigator what was said or what the outcome was. But you do want to let them know that this discussion will not go beyond, will not be told or spread to people beyond those who have a need to know. And you also want to remind the person being interviewed that there's an expectation that they will maintain confidentiality, that they will not now leave this room and start talking to other employees about the questions that they were asked or the subject of the investigation, because then the integrity will be compromised. So you want to remind the person being interviewed that there is an expectation that they will maintain confidentiality, and along those lines, that this will not be recorded. Not sure what happened here, why the slide didn't move. All right, opening the interview. So when you, I'm sorry, the slides are not moving. Anyway, I'll keep talking until we solve the issue. But when you're opening the interview, in addition to introducing yourself and all of these things that we have just talked about, you are going to want to ask the interviewee to let you know if for whatever reason they do not understand a question. I always tell people, if I ask you a question and you respond to it, I am going to assume that you understood the question. So please, if you do not understand it, let me know. Then you're also going to want to ask the interview if they have any questions of you before they begin. When asking questions, you want to use what we call a funneled questioning or funneling method. What that means is that you're going to start big and then you're going to go narrow. So for example, let me give you an example. If I'm interviewing somebody, I might start by, and we're in the middle of a discussion, I might say, what do you think about X? That's an open-ended question. Then I might ask, what is your basis for thinking X? So I'm asking for clarification. Why do you think what you think? They're going to give me a response. Then I'm going to ask, is there any other reason why you think that? I'm narrowing it down so that they give me all of the reasons. And then I will end by saying, have we covered all of the reasons why you think what you think? Right? That is a funnel. We started big, we ended up small because we want to pin them down and really get to the bottom of what they think and why they think it. Right? So that is the style of questioning that you're going to use regardless of who you're interviewing, whether it is the complainant, a witness, or the accused. Now, some do's and don'ts. You want to, when you're interviewing and the person is sharing with you and communicating with you, you want to write down what that person is saying as much as possible verbatim, but I understand that none of us can probably write quickly enough to capture everything. But the key is to make sure that we're writing objectively, that we're not inserting our own thoughts or impressions into what is being said. If you're going to summarize knowledge, that knowledge, again, cannot be infused with your own thoughts as an investigator on the situation. You want the person to give you specific responses to the key questions and to key documents. You don't want them to speculate, and you want to be persistent and patient in making sure that you get from them what you need. Again, you want to close the funnel. So when you start big, you're going to want to narrow that down to make sure that you pin them down. And you want to also take note of relevant facts regarding credibility. For example, if you were asking Mary a question, and when you asked that particular question, she became fidgety or nervous or started, giving you like an answer that just didn't make sense, you want to make note of that so that when you are making credibility assessments as part of the investigation, you remember what was the interviewee's reaction to particular questions. You do not want to make conclusions as to the facts or credibility. For example, you don't want to say Mary is lying. You want to say when Mary was asked X, she reacted this particular way. Or when Mary was asked X, she contradicted what she had previously stated 5 minutes earlier when asked Y. That's the way you want to do. If something is being said in quotes, you want to use the quote marks. Let whomever is going to look at this report or at this investigation file 3 years down the line, let them know that that is a quote. That is what the person said. So you don't want to use shorthand for quotes. You want to quote it directly. And you also do not want to stick to your outline, unwaveringly. You want to make sure that you have the flexibility that I mentioned earlier you would need to have. Now, go a little more on these credibility determinations. You want to ask questions to get to the bottom of, is this person saying the truth? Do I have a reason to doubt what Mary is telling me? So you might want to find out what else is going on the workplace. Has Mary had, a long-standing feud with the accused, and therefore is more likely to say something that might be detrimental to the accused? Has Mary herself had issues with the accused before, such that she might have a preconceived notion of him or her? Is there any motivation to lie? For example, is Mary the best friend of the complainant? You want to also watch for consistency of account. And I alluded to this earlier. If Mary is now saying something completely different or contradicting herself, you want to know that. You want to know that at the beginning of the interview, Mary said X, and now she has changed the story so that there is consistency. You don't want to write down that she changed the story. You want to write down both inconsistent statements. And oftentimes, the reality of the situation is that we're dealing with a he said, she said situation. So finding those clues that allow us to corroborate, certain things is going to be important. So you're going to ask for, how do you happen to remember that thing? Ask questions that lead you to make some sort of assessment as to whether a person is having selective memory. They remember in great detail what happened on such day, but not what happened on the next day. Why is that? Why does the person remember in great detail what Joseph said, but not what Mary said in response? These are all questions that you want to ask to get to the bottom and be able to make an assessment as to credibility. You want to ask, do you have any documents? Do you have any pictures, any text messages from that day, any actual documents that corroborate what you're telling me today? And then you also want to ask, is there anybody else who I should be talking to who might be able to shed more light into this issue? Because again, the goal is to find corroborating evidence or evidence that disproves the allegation so that you can ultimately find whether it is substantiated or not. And I mentioned this earlier, do not write down things like Mary's lying or Mary's biased or I think Mary is making this up. You want to just document what Mary's demeanor is when you're asking these questions. You know how they always tell us in like college, like show, don't tell. When you're writing, just let me see how she was acting. That's exactly what I want you to do when you're investigating a matter. I want you to paint a picture of what was going on in that room so that I can visualize how Mary was responding when you were asking those questions. It's not as powerful if you tell me that Mary is lying, because that is just your perception. But if you show me ways in which I myself can lead to the conclusion that she was lying, then that is powerful. And you always want to watch for confirmation bias. No matter how open-minded we are, no matter how wonderful people we are, we all have some biases and preconceived notions. And a good investigator should be checking for that, should be making sure that they're not reaching a conclusion too soon, or that they have not too quickly assessed that, oh, Mary's probably right, so I'm only going to be looking for evidence that confirms that initial assessment or that initial gut feeling that I had when I received the complaint. 4 P's. These are 4 things that I want you to practice when you are investigating and conducting an investigation. Patience. People may be resistant to speak with you at first, or they may, start at the beginning of the interview being very standoffish or cold. You have to practice patience. You have to practice persistence. You have to have a buildup of rapport with that person before they will be willing to share. So do not get impatient and give up too quickly. Also, the power of silence. With time and as I get older, I've become better at this. But I remember years ago that I was very uncomfortable sitting in silence. I just felt like somebody needed to be saying something at all times. And that's not true. Sometimes when you just stay quiet looking at a person, the person will then start saying all the same things, right? So because that person likely feels uncomfortable sitting in silence. So you, as the investigator, want to practice the power of silence, and you want to just pause and let the other person talk and even volunteer information. And always you want to keep a poker face. I must admit, not my strong suit. I'm not always the best at the poker face, right? But that is something that we need to practice and get better at, because if we're interviewing somebody and we're making faces when they say certain things, then they're going to see where our mind is at, and then they may change their statements or their narrative or manipulate the facts in a way to feed whatever they think that we want to hear, or whatever it's going to lead to the conclusion that they want us to lead, they want us to make, right? So having that poker face and not letting the interviewee know what you are thinking about is going to be important. Now, when you are closing the interview, and this paused again, so I apologize, I don't know what's happening. When you're closing the interview, there are some questions that you want to ask regardless of who you're interviewing. You want to ask, is there any other person whom I should be talking to regarding this matter? Is there anything that we didn't cover during this discussion that you think I should know? We want to also keep asking the same question until we get a concrete answer or until it becomes clear that there is nothing else to be shared. You want to ask, as I mentioned earlier, about documents and files and materials that the person might have. You will ask about some of those things during the course of the interview, but at the end, I like to re-ask, is there any document that I should be looking at that we have not already discussed? I also want to remind the person, the witness that I'm interviewing, that if they later remember something that they think I should know, that this was not the end of the process, that they should reach out to me. So I'm always going to leave them, whether it's my contact card or I'm going to, give them some way to contact me and to reach me so that they can provide additional information later on if they happen to remember something. Them about preservation of documents. So not just ask about whether there are other documents, but you also want to tell them what steps they need to take to preserve those documents. Many times the documents may be in their own personal computer or their personal cell phone, so you want to make sure that you tell them not to delete those documents. And then you want to let them know what's next. Like, I've interviewed you. Now we will keep you updated. We will follow up with you if we need anything else. Otherwise, you will hear from us at some point. And just be mindful that this is a long process that may take some time. And therefore, it might take us some time to get back to you. And finally, when I'm closing an interview, I want to remind them again about confidentiality and remind them again about the non-retaliation policy. And I will let them know to please reach out to me if they happen to learn of any information that they believe may be in violation of the company's anti-retaliation policy or of the confidentiality that we have asked them to maintain. Now, as I said, these principles are going to apply regardless of who you are interviewing, whether you're interviewing the complainant, whether you're interviewing the witnesses, or whether you're interviewing the accused. But let's go over some key things to remember with each of these categories of witnesses. First, when interviewing the complainant, I typically will start with that person, right? There are some times where the complainant is out on leave or they are unavailable for whatever reason, and we choose not to interview them first. But whenever I have an opportunity to interview the complainant first, that is the first person I'm going to interview because that's the person who has a grievance. So I want to know what are the allegations and how, what is your basis? What information do you have? What do I need to do in order to get to the bottom of this? And then when you are interviewing the complainant, and I mentioned this earlier briefly, you want to make sure that you do not let your empathy get the best of you, and that you do not offer statements for which you have no support yet. You don't want to say, I am so sorry that happened, when you do not know that what actually happened. Allegations are not facts. Now, when you're interviewing the witnesses, you're still going to use that same funneling method of starting big and going small. You want to get their piece of the story. And what you're going to be looking for is either for information that corroborates the allegations or discredits them. And you're always going to be thinking about those credibility questions. And then when you're interviewing the accused, which I said earlier, it's a common misstep that I see, that we skip that process. You're going to want to do this for two reasons. It's a fair opportunity to respond. So we should do it just as a matter of, well, fairness, but also we should do it because it's going to help us later on in litigation. If we don't give the accused a fair opportunity to respond, it's going to come out at some point in a deposition, in a settlement conference, or in front of a jury, basically that we did not take our job seriously enough and we're not thorough enough because we skipped the cues as if just to discount his or her position altogether. And you want to plan for confidentiality as well when interviewing the accused. You want to think of ways in which you can share what has been said without putting the complainant on blast, right? Like, you don't want to necessarily disclose the complainant's identity. What you want to disclose is the nature of the allegations so that you are able to conduct that interview. Now, some useful questions that you can ask the accused when you're interviewing. You may give them tidbits of information as to what has been alleged, and so that the person can respond to them. That is a very open-ended question. You will ask them, is there anything else that you want to tell me about this particular allegation that has been made? You may want to ask them, do you have any reason to believe why somebody will have said that about you? Do you have any person that you want me to talk to that will be able to discredit this? What is your version of the events, right? It's all about making sure that you give them a fair opportunity to respond. And I typically will leave the accused for the end, because at that point I will have had, what is the scope of the allegations as told by the complainant? I will have the witnesses' versions of the events, and then I will be able to ask the accused about each of these things all at once, right? As opposed to interviewing the accused, then I learn some more from the witness, and then I have to go and interview him again or her again about that particular issue. Now, post-interview, you're going to want to record the employee's reactions. So after each interview, you're going to be doing this. You're going to be taking notes during the interviews, and then after the interview, you're going to prepare like a witness summary. So you want to document that the interview occurred, who was present in the room, if there happened to be a witness from HR or somebody or a co-investigator that was in the room, you're going to want to mention that. You're going to want to record what the employees' reactions were, what was said, and you're going to want to attach your notes to the investigation file. And the investigation file should be kept separate from the personnel file. So I don't want you having all of this investigation documentation together with the person's payroll records and onboarding documents and the offer letter. That is not the place. So just like we keep a separate file for medical issues, FMLA, ADA, we have to keep a separate file for the investigation. Now, the final documentation. Lots of you had questions about this. What should be and should not be included in that final report? Well, our objective when we were preparing this report is to make sure that we outline all of the allegations that were made and what our conclusion was as to each of them, right? You're going to want to have a record of your reasoning and every step that you took to reach a conclusion in this matter. And you want to avoid unnecessarily controversial statements in your final report. You need to know your audience. Who is going to be reading this report? When are they going to be reading it? And where will this report ever show up? So the who is not just the people who are implicated today, but as I mentioned many times during this presentation, the people who may be implicated years down the road should there be litigation. So you want to provide enough information in that report and be sufficiently thorough that years later, we can almost like position ourselves in the interview room, in the investigator's office, and see everything that the investigator did. So can a third party understand it without having to reference other materials? You want your report to be understood by a third party without that third party having to go and investigate certain things. You want to make sure that your report is objective and accurate. You want to make sure that it provides the decision makers enough information to determine what they should do next. Should they fire somebody? Should they discipline with something other than termination? Should they provide training? And for each allegation, you're going to want to have allegation number 1, substantiated or not substantiated, and explain why it was substantiated or not substantiated. The first thing, it's really going to be an overview of the issue. So what is it that, how did this investigation come to be? What were the issues that were raised? So you want to include details about the complainant, about the alleged wrongdoer, the date of the complaint, and the nature of the complaint. You're going to want your report must include who was interviewed. So the date and location and name of each person interviewed. Why was that particular person interviewed? So how did that person come to be implicated? You want your report to include all the policies that are at play in a particular investigation. So if you are conducting an investigation of discrimination, you may want to have in there your EEO policy. You may want to have in there your code of conduct policy. Anything that's relevant, any policy that's relevant to the allegations, you're going to want to mention in your report and attach them to the report. And you're going to want your report to explain, why did you even look at these policies? Why were they implicated? How did you reach a conclusion that these policies were pertinent to the allegations at hand? Witness summaries. Remember that we have been talking about witness interviews, right? Like the witness interviews and the notes that you take during those interviews. You're going to attach those notes to your report, but your report should also include a summary of what each witness said that is pertinent to each of the allegations. So it's going to be a summary, and then separately you're going to attach the witness notes. Factual findings. You're going to have a short factual finding on each of the allegations. You're going to conclude whether it likely occurred as alleged or whether it's substantiated or was not substantiated. And again, your reasoning for that. You are going to want to, as you are writing that report, ask yourself, are your factual findings based on objective and accurate criteria? Going to be, once you write your report, go back and look to see to what extent you have inserted any emotion or any of your own perceptions about the events. And you want to avoid editorializing. Do not use unnecessary inflammatory language. Do not embellish. Just keep it very, very factual. Now, after the report, somebody asked in the chat, well, sometimes a person does not like the results of the investigation, even though the results, showed that the allegation did not occur. How do you provide the person with information that is more satisfactory based on the results of the investigation? So let me show you this particular slide. You want to follow up with the complainant. Even if you think that the complainant is not going to like the results of the investigation, do it. You need to tell the complainant because of what I mentioned at the beginning. If you never close the circle, the person feels that you didn't investigate. You may have spent months investigating, but if you never let the complainant know what the outcome was, they are not going to believe that you did the investigation, and it's going to lead to morale issues and dissatisfaction. So you want to, even if the complainant is not going to be happy with the outcome, you want to share the outcome. You want to thank them for raising their concern. You want to let them know that you conducted a thorough investigation. You do not need to get into the weeds of what that investigation consisted of, but you can say generalities like for the past 2 months, or for the past week, we have been looking into your allegations. We have looked at multiple documents, interviewed multiple people, and we have been unable to corroborate the nature or the substance of your allegations, something like that. If, on the other hand, the allegations were substantiated, you want to let the complainant know, what are you going to do about it, right? Like, I complained about something and you found that what I was saying was likely true. How are you going to handle it? So you might want to let them know, we're taking appropriate remedial steps. We're going to be ordering some training, and just trust that we're taking care of the situation. Now, I understand sometimes a complainant is not going to be satisfied no matter what you say. It's not going to be pleased with the outcome no matter how many pleasantries you use or anything. But do not feel compelled to share the specifics of the investigation, because whatever you say can be used against you later, right? And in litigation, or it may be misunderstood or misconstrued. So you don't want to get into debates with the complainant. You don't want to provide specifics about the remedial measures. Just let them know the remedial measures are being taken. So stay away from that, even if there's some degree of dissatisfaction from the complainant. You cannot make everyone happy. As I said earlier, you want to maintain that separate investigation file. So please do not commingle the documents. Keep them confidential. If you have a huge HR department, but not everybody had a need to know about this particular investigation or was involved in it or had an interest in it by virtue, of the business needs or anything like that, then you do not need to put it in a place where all of those people have access. So keep restricted access to these documents. Let me see. Stephanie, do you want to talk about this now for a minute, and then I'll look through some questions that we can answer for maybe 4 or 5 minutes at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rocio. And thank you so much for providing us with this in-depth look at conducting lawful investigations. For all of the viewers today, we had nearly 300 questions in the Q&A box. So while she reads through some of those questions, I just wanted to offer an additional opportunity for you to see a demo of the Compliance HR Navigator Suite. As I mentioned earlier, an up-to-date and legally compliant employee handbook helps to hold your employees accountable for knowing your organization's culture, the standards of conduct, compliance policies, and everything else that you include in that document. So it's just one more resource for your team should they need to conduct one of these investigations. Our tools are designed to help simplify the complexity of employment law and save your team time and money while providing accurate and legally compliant information that's backed by Littler's subject matter expertise. So if you're interested, please respond yes to the poll on your screen. Again, our suite of solutions cover everything from employee handbooks to employee overtime, important documents, overtime classification risk analysis, and independent contractor risk assessments. I'll leave the poll open until the conclusion of today's presentation. Rocio, would you like another minute?
Yeah, I mean, if you all don't mind, I'll answer a few questions. So somebody asked, somebody said, if the complainant is on leave of absence for a foreseeable future, what is the best practice to complete interviews and the investigation in a timely manner? We are waiting to let the accused respond until we gather all of the information, but also want to ensure all parties are given an opportunity to respond. There is this misconception that when a person is out on leave, that you can never contact them. You cannot contact them about substantive work, but if they have raised a complaint, you could, reach out and let them know, look, we're trying to investigate this complaint that you have raised. Do you have some time to talk to me? And then if they say no, I will document that to the file. I will follow up with them again a few days later. If they still say no, I will document that on the file again. I will follow up again. And eventually I will just tell them, look, we're trying to investigate this. If you do not participate in the process, the legitimacy or the completeness of the investigation may be compromised. And we might not be able to, reach a conclusion regarding this matter. And then at that point, if they still do not participate, they have sort of like made their bed, so to speak, right? Like they cannot later complain that you didn't reach a conclusion that they wanted you to reach because they never participated. They never contributed to the process, right? So you can still you can still reach out to try to investigate. You do not have to wait for the person to be back. You just cannot contact them about substantive work if they are on FMLA, for example. Somebody asked, what type of training does an HR professional need to conduct investigations? Sorry. This type of training, right? So we do this training that I did today, we do something way more in depth that we give to HR professionals who are going to be conducting investigations, right? We show them videos, we go through practical examples of if you have, we will make up a scenario where we have a complaint and we will have the HR professional walk through the different steps, what they would do, and we will coach them on the right methodology to follow, right? So this 1 hour training that you just participating in is a start, but not the end, right? Like it's a very basic training, but I will encourage anybody who's actually doing investigations to do something more in depth. What else was asked? Curious how you might handle an anonymous complaint of a higher level employee and assume there is fear of retaliation because the high level employee is a high performer. Okay. I will investigate the same way as I will investigate any other one, right? Sometimes when the complaint is about a higher level employee, there will be, less willingness to come forward. Like I've seen many times that, for example, people will make up a new email address, right, to make this complaint anonymously. And I will tell the person who's making the complaint, we would like to talk to you to learn more about the situation. Please let us know if that's something that you're willing to do. We realize that you have made this complaint anonymously, but in order to really get to the bottom of the allegations, it will be helpful if we get to speak with you. And then if the person does not want to speak with you, then you have to work with what you have. No matter what, you're going to investigate, and you're going to try to appease the person as much as possible by mentioning the anti-retaliation policy. But, if the person does not want to share more or refuses to come forward, then you just investigate with what you have. Somebody asked, do we interview the accused before or after interviewing the witnesses and the accuser? I typically will leave the accused for the end, because at that point I will have learned presumably all of the information that anybody had to share with me regarding the allegations, and then I can have the accused respond to each of them or to the appropriate ones. I know we're way out of time. As Stephanie said, there's like 369 questions. So we will get this at the end, and I'll do my best to respond to any of them, or to all of them. But if you have any questions that you want to direct, to me, just my email is rblancogarcia@littler.com. Feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you and hear from you. And I love this stuff. So you're almost doing me a favor by reaching out. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time.